So we're going to go over graphing tangent functions. In another video, you will see the steps to graphing cosine and sine functions. But graphing tangent functions are different because one, it's not a wave, so the period's going to be different. So if you notice, the start and the stop, you're setting equal to negative pi over 2 and positive pi over 2. And this comes from the tangent graph because one period starts at negative pi over 2 and goes all the way up and ends where x is at pi over 2. Not that you need to know the proof or why, but fun fact. And then notice that the difference between the x values is stop minus start over 4, and that's because one period will have 5 points. So they're broken up into 4 equal intervals, which is why you're dividing it by 4. So starting off with these steps, given tangent, I'm just going to set the bx value, because there's no c being added or subtracted, equal to negative pi over 2 for the start value, meaning my first x value, where does it start in one period. So I'm going to set 2x equal to negative pi over 2. And then the stop, I'm going to set 2x equal to positive pi over 2. And from here, solve for x. So in this case, I'm going to divide both sides by 2 to solve for x. Keep in mind that we don't divide, we keep, change, and flip. So the fraction form of 2 is 2 over 1. If I were to flip that, I would get 1 over 2, which gives me x equals negative pi over 4. And from here, if I divide both sides by 2 as well, the same thing's happening. Oops, not by x, by 2. The same thing's happening. So I'm dividing pi over 2 by 2, which would give me positive pi over 4. So I have my start and my stop value. What does this mean? Well, if I were to make my XY table, and again, there are 5 points in one period, the first x value is going to be negative pi over 4. And the fifth or last x value in one period will be positive pi over 4. So what about all the x values in between? Well, that's where the formula, the difference between the x values come in. I'm going to take my stop, which is pi over 4, minus my start value, which is negative pi over 4, and divide the whole thing by 4, because again, when you have 5 points, they're broken up into 4 equal intervals. So from here, start minus stop, pi over 4 plus pi over 4 would give me 2 pi over 4, which is just pi over 2. And pi over 2 over pi over 4 would give me pi over 8. So we do the whole keep, change, flip thing again. So each time to get from one x value to the next, you're just adding pi over 8. Do you really have to add the pi? No, because if you're using a calculator, you could just take negative 1 over 4 plus 1 over 8. Make sure you're using your fraction key button, which if you're on a scientific calculator, it's that ABC button. So negative 1 over 4 plus 1 over 8, and you'll get negative 1/8. So we'll just bring the pi over with that, negative pi over 8. Negative pi over 8 plus pi over 8 would give me 0. And then 0 plus pi over 8 would give me pi over 8. And just to check if I'm on the right track, I'm going to add pi over 8 plus pi over 8, which would give me pi over 4. So once I have the x values, math really never changes in this respect. To find the y values, you're going to plug it in. So you're going to plug the x values you have into this function that we're given up here. Now, little fun fact, or I guess a hint, anytime you're starting and stopping in one period of the tangent graph, the start and the stop are undefined. And notice that on the parent graph, which is not shown here, but there are vertical asymptotes, which is what undefined means from a graphing standpoint. They would be your vertical asymptotes. So from here, if I were to plug in negative pi over 8, so I'm going to work it out here, 3 tangent, 2 times negative pi over 8. So this would give me y equals 3 tangent. this reduces into negative pi over 4. Now, where is negative pi over 4? That just means from the unit circle, you're going downwards a distance of pi over 4. The negative just means you're headed downwards, clockwise rather than counterclockwise, which is the same thing as saying 7 pi over 4. It's a coterminal angle. If you can't see it graphically, which is perfectly fine, just take negative pi over 4 and add 2 pi to it, which again, in the calculator, you don't have to use pi. You can use negative 1 over 4 plus 2, which would give you 7 over 4. Just bring the pi over afterwards. So really, you're taking the tangent of 7 pi over 4. So anytime they give you a negative angle, you have no idea where it is, find the coterminal, meaning add a circle to it, add 2 pi to it, add 360 to it, depending on if they give it to you in radians or degrees. From here, we have to apply the unit circle. What is the tangent value of 7 pi over 4? And that would be negative 1. And then we have negative 3. If I were to replace the x with 0, and I'm going to work it out here, 3 times tangent of 2 times 0, well, 2 times 0 would give me 0. And if I look on the unit circle at 0, the tangent value there is also 0. So the tangent of 0 is 0. 0 times 3 is 0. And the nice thing about the tangent function, as long as there's no d value, vertical translation added outside the parentheses, is it's a pattern, negative 3, 0, and then it'll go up to 3. You can plug it in and, of course, check it. So what does this graph look like? Well, since I'm out of room, the lazy version here, negative pi over 4, negative pi over 8, 0, pi over 8, pi over 4. So at negative pi over 4, it's undefined, which means vertical asymptote, pi over 4, same thing. At negative pi over 8, I'm at negative 3. 0, I'm at 0. Pi over 8, I'm at positive 3. And I already know the shape of the graph, which is not going to change. So it's going to kind of look like this. And mind you, I am not an artist, so there's your graph. Hope this helps.